Hi, so in this lesson I'll be doing a condensed version of a fairly standard 11 plus reading comprehension and creative writing focused lesson. So in this lesson we'll be focusing on Holes by Louis Sacco, which is a really popular book among my learners in Key Stage 2. Normally I would start off the lesson by looking at a checklist of what we're going to do in that lesson, and then coming back to that various points in the lesson to give things a bit of a tick off as we work our way through the exercises. And the first thing that we would usually do would be some form of editing and improving based on what we've done in the previous lesson, unless it was the first lesson. The next thing that we would go on to do would be to have a making predictions time. So, for example, I would ask, here is an image of the front cover of the book. Well, what can you see on the image? What do you think might be represented? Who do you think the character that's represented might be? What kind of personality do you think he might be? What kind of genre of book do you think this might be based on the imagery? And what would be your guesses about what type of story this is and what kind of thing might happen in this story? We'd have a little bit of discussion of those points in order to prepare and predict what kind of thing we're going to expect when we come on to reading the main text. I would then move along to the next section, which would be beginning to look at the extract itself. So on the page there is an extract from the book, and what we would do is work in a 3-read method. This is my recommended way for comprehensions and for assessments. Is first of all, first read reading in your head. Second read reading out loud. That's not always possible in an exam, so reading kind of under your breath, thinking about the sounds and the rhythm, and making sure that you've had a second read through your text. And then finally reading with your pen, so reading and starting to make some notes, some annotations, or even beginning to answer assessment questions. So I would give some time to read through the text. And then say, if you could please give me a heads up once you are done reading in your head, and then we will read some of the sections out loud. So imagining that some time has passed and that you've had a chance to read the text in your head. Then in our best audiobook voices, we can take it in turns to read through the text together and listen to the sounds of the text, the kind of rhythm, how long or short the sentences are, and what kind of tone is being struck here. We're going to read the text out loud together, and then we will begin to work through our table. So the table looks like this, and this is a really good place to store all of your annotations and what you're thinking about as you're going through your comprehension, and to make a record, and finally to give a rating and say what you thought of it and if you liked it and how likely you would be to read this text on your own. So we would do a little bit of reading out loud and imagining that a lovely communal reading out loud had taken place. Then we would come back together to begin to make some notes about the key points in the text. And the first thing to do is always to check, is there any vocabulary that you're not quite sure on that might be new or interesting, or that you've got some questions about. So going back into the text and having a look. And I think within this text, I've taught it a couple of times before. Sometimes we get some questions about what a hammock looks like. So that's one of those kind of cloth beds that you can hang in between trees. And usually if I was going to put some vocabulary that was a concrete noun like that, I might go ahead and find an image as well to represent it, especially sometimes we can't take for granted that our students have had experience of particular items or particular kind of cultural norms within the UK, for example. And I would, after kind of looking at some of the vocabulary, make sure that we've got a note of who are the characters that are mentioned in here. So who are the people that come up in the text, and thinking about what role they have within the text as well. So obviously we have Stanley, and we have the warden, and we can think about what kind of characters they might be. And once you've got your impressions, it's always about finding the evidence behind that. Why do you think that? Why do you think that the warden doesn't seem like a nice person? Where's your evidence in the text? So if we're going to make some notes about characters, then ideally finding our evidence as well, putting our case across why we think a certain way, how we've come to our conclusions. An interesting part of this text is also the themes of crime and punishment. And what is the right thing to do when somebody has done something that they shouldn't have done? How can they be corrected? What's the best way to go about that? What's fair? And in the text, we have this really interesting line where the writer says, some people believe that you can make a bad boy into a good boy by making them dig holes all day. And that's an interesting thing to discuss. And I would ask my learner, what do you think? Do you agree? Do you think that that's a good way to make people behave better and do the right thing? Why or why not? And then to begin with some writing to make sure that we're making our notes, putting these annotations into the table. Then we would be writing those down in full sentences, these discussion points and opinions. Towards the end of the lesson, we would develop our discussion of the text into a creative writing piece. And that's what's up on the screen right now. So here the task is to write some show don't tell sentences about how Stanley felt as he arrived at the camp. And show don't tell is a concept that we have to keep on talking about how to make our writing interesting and not just go for the simplest possible sentence, always upgrading everything, putting the sprinkles on the ice cream. So if we had a sentence like Stanley was very tired, that's just telling the audience and it's a little bit boring. Instead, we could think about how does the character show that feeling of tiredness? What's going to happen? What's going to be the body language? And write it in a different way. For example, Stanley's eyes kept falling shut. He stretched and yawned. And I would then set the task for the learner to continue on and write some of their own sentences based on what they thought the character might be feeling at this point. And we have to finish off there. This is just a short taster of a lesson, but we'd give some time to look at that and then come together and celebrate what went well and think about what we could do next time to be even better.